guys, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Theo. This is part 4 of my 2024 book reviews. Before I begin, I'm looking at myself and I look so scary, and that is because I am currently sick and I just don't care enough to look decent, and I look like I got punched in the face, but it's just because I'm sick. So my goal in 2024 is to read 50 books. How these book reviews work is that every 3 to 4 books I sit down and I rate them and I give you a little summary. Unfortunately, the last 6 months of my 2024 got extremely busy and I just completely forgot to do this. So I'm doing it now. Also, if you want to watch all the other books that I have read in 2024, they will be linked down below. The first book I read is the third and newest release of the Housemaid series, and I know that they're making it into a movie, which I'm really excited about. I rated this book a 7 out of 10. This book was kind of all over the place and it was a little bit repetitive in my opinion. Enzo and Millie are finally together, spoiler alert, and they move to this beautiful home in Long Island, which they can't afford, but somehow they get a deal on it. They have children now, and then their neighbor's husband turns out dead, and in the middle of it there's a big kidnapping. Millie's trying not to get involved in all that drama again, but she's like trying to figure out because her son is being framed. And then literally in like the last 2 chapters, everything gets revealed, and it was a little bit of a plot twist, but again, it was a little bit repetitive for me. The next book I read was Flawless. I don't have this book with me because I left it back in Florida, and I rated this book a 5 out of 10. This is a series that I had been putting off, and I had an intern at my job tell me to read the book because it's her favorite series. This book made me realize our age gap, because I like to think that I'm fairly young. You will never feel older than when an intern makes you read a book. It was not great. It was zero plot, character, any form of development that a book should have. Basically, this famous guy that has a bad rep, so his agent gives him a babysitter, and that babysitter is the agent's daughter, and she has this crazy ex who's still obsessed with her. So they kiss to make the guy jealous, and then they quote unquote fall in love because they start having sex. That was literally the gist of it. Next book I read is The Midnight Feast by Lucy Foley. And if you know me, you know that I am not a big fan of hers, but I feel like her books, there's just something missing that could make her books great. And this book had it. I'm so glad I read this book. I rated this book a 9.5 out of 10. This book is insane. I actually could not put this book down. It goes in between past, present, and future. There's 5 point of views, so you have to make sure you know who is who. And it's this luxurious hotel in the middle of the woods, and people are turning up dead. And then there's these things called the birds, and they're oh, the birds are killing them. So you hear the birds and you're that doesn't make any sense. How could birds kill them? There's letters being revealed. Everyone's somehow connected with each other in one way or another. And I don't really know how to talk about this book without spoiling it, but everything comes together and you find out what the birds are and how they're killing everyone and why they're being killed and who's doing these letters and the fires, and mind-blowingly good. The next and 50th book that I read in 2024 is Made in This Moment by Maddie Prewett. And this book actually reached my goal of 50 in 2024, and I upped my goal count to 65. This book was so amazing. I always loved her. If you guys don't know, she's from The Bachelor. She was on Pilot Pete's season. But this book really opened my eyes because I feel I struggle a lot with FOMO and missing out, and there's things that I don't want to do, or places that I don't want to go to, or people that I genuinely don't want to hang out with, but then I have FOMO. And she talks about how important it is to you can't live your life in FOMO because there are reasons that your soul is telling you don't hang out with these people, don't go out to these places, because that's God's way of protecting you from a lot of things. Also talks a lot about how not to live for the world and how to live for Christ, which I think that there was a time that I really fell into that. And I unfortunately had a friend who's no longer in my life that when I would mess up, she would tell me that God was ashamed of me, but to just pray about it, because that's all we have to do. It's just God's mad at you, God's ashamed, but just pray. So that friend really took a toll into my relationship with God. The way that Maddie speaks, you can just see how Jesus really lives in her, because she talks about how we have to live better, right? And like, you know, like there are things that like we as Christians shouldn't be doing, but because of that fear of FOMO, that's why like God has like essentially like rules for us, because he knows what's best for us. And a lot of these times that we do these things, we end up feeling really bad about ourselves, and that was like God's way of protecting us. And she also explains a lot how like God knows our shortcomings, and he knows like when we mess up, and there's nothing that we can do or say that he doesn't already know about, and that despite all of that, he would still send Jesus to like die specifically for you, knowing everything that you've done or that you will do, and every single thought, you know, that even like your friends don't know. And I really do believe that this book really helped me get my perspective on my relationship with God back, that like my relationship with Jesus isn't what other people tell me that it is, but what I know that it is between me and him. And yeah, that like I am gonna obviously like fall short. Like I'm not saying like do whatever you want and God's gonna forgive you, but in those times that I do that, like, God doesn't love you any less. The next book I read is called The Cheat Sheet, and my friend Nina recommended this book to me because she knows that I love like cheesy rom-coms, but this was just over the top for me, and I told her that, and I rated it a 3 out of 10. Where to begin with this book? There was times, you know, when you get secondhand embarrassment, that was me with this book. It's basically about these like two best friends. One of them is in the NFL, and she's obviously in love with him as per usual. And she drunkenly tells a reporter that she's in love with him. So then people are like, oh my gosh. So then they start fake dating, and then they like actually like fall in love and start dating. And that was it. That's literally just the book. Sorry I spoiled it for you. But it was just very cringy. Like the lines and stuff. And Nina was like, Phew, I thought you would. She was like, I love the book. And I was like, it was just too much for me. Like I love a cheesy rom-com, but not like a secondhand embarrassment rom-com, you know? The next book I read is also another book that I don't have with me because Nina lent it to me, and it's called Unsteady. It kind of gave me Icebreaker vibes if you guys have read the Maples Hill series, but I rated it a 7.5 out of 10. Now, it's gonna sound really corny, but it was actually like a pretty decent book. There's this figure skater who is fighting for custody for her two younger brothers because she has an alcoholic father and an abusive mother. And there's a hockey player who she learns very quickly that he gets severe panic attacks. They become involved. He's helping her with the kids, and then she's helping him through the panic attacks. Then they do a little bit of Friends with Benefits, and then they fall in love. It was a decent book. I feel like it's more for like the high school age group. The next book I read is People We Meet on Vacation. And if you know me, you know that I hated Happy Place or Happy People, whatever it's called, by Emily Henry. And I am so glad that I gave her another chance because I rated this book a 9 out of 10. This book gave me a lot of One Day vibes, if you've seen that series or have read the book. This book takes place in past and present, and it's about two best friends who every year they meet up and they like go on a trip together, and they like see each other even though they're like dating different people. 2 years prior to like present, they go on a trip and something happens, and they're like, oh no. So then they stop talking to each other, and then she reaches out to him. She's like, I actually miss him, like let's put the incident behind us. They go on another trip, they hash out their past. It's a friends to lovers trope. Very good. I recommend it. The next book I read, following the trend, I don't have it with me, it's A Handmaid's Tale. And this book, I think a lot of people read this in high school, but I was in AP classes and we didn't really read like books like that. You know, it felt like we read more like Shakespeare and like non-interesting books. Rated this book a 7 out of 10, and it takes place in a totalitarianism. Man, I was an AP and I can't. English is not my first language. I think that's how you say that word. Totalitarianism, whatever it is, society where these handmaids have to basically have sex with their like owners and like give them children, and like the owners are like elites. It's a lot about like, I guess it's not qualified as rape, but like I qualified as kind of rape because it's about like sexual slavery. So like they're having sex with these men to give them children. The main character, before it turned into the society, she had been married and she had a child, but they took her husband and turned her into an elite man, and then her child was like taken from her. One of the many things that bothered me from this book was, first of all, the author wouldn't let me know when the book was in the past and it was in the present. It was a puzzle. I had to figure that out. And another thing is that she didn't use quotation marks when people were speaking, and that always drives me off. bonkers. Next and 55th book that I read in 2024 is The Power of Habit. And my brother gave me this book, and I rated this book an 8.5 out of 10. I think my brother was trying to tell me something when he gave me this book. This book was really eye-opening to a lot of things. It explains how scientifically there are a lot of things that we call behavior, but they're really just habits, and that like this like behavioral thing that like you're used to doing, how you're used to living life, it's really just a habit that can be like rewired. And of course he gives like the little path on how to like rewire and how long it takes and all, like he gives you a roadmap, but he does specify that like the roadmap is easier said than done. The next book I read is The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. I rated this book a 7 out of 10. And this was one of her first books that was published, actually. It's about this group of friends that meet up in Scotland, and one of them gets murdered. I'm not gonna lie to you, this book took me a month to read, and I knew who the killer was within the first 100 pages. There's a lot of stalking and like things from the past are coming back and like haunting them, I guess you could say. But yeah, there was really not much to it. The next book I read is the third and newest book in the Maple Hill series called Daydreams. And I rated this book a 6.5 out of 10. It was just very predictable and cheesy. It's all about this girl who she's a people pleaser and she doesn't have like experience that like girls do when they get into college. She had just broken up with her boyfriend. She's trying to become a writer. The guy in the book, the main guy, he's failing a class, so she begins to tutor him, and in exchange for her tutoring him, he's giving her like experiences that she's never had, if you know what that means. And then they become a situationship, and then they fall in love. The next book I read, my gosh, Naya, I love you, but I just couldn't with this book. It's called Magnolia Parks. I rated this book a 1 out of 10. There's not much to this book, if I'm being completely honest with you. It's about these two socialites, so kind of like Gossip Girl vibes, that they live in London, I believe, and they dated when they were like younger, and then he cheated on her, so they broke up, and they stayed friends. She dates people. He gets mad at her. And then when he has sex with people, she gets mad at him, even though they're not together. That's the book. Every single chapter is the same. The next book I read is Terms and Conditions, and this is the second book in the Dreamland series, and I do want to continue the series. I think there's like 1 or 2 more books in it. I rated this book a 7.5 out of 10. They are cheesy, but they're like cheesy enough where they like wrote me in. This guy he's the brother of the first book protagonist person. He's in line to inherit $25 billion and become the CEO of Dreamland, which is Disney World. But for him to be able to do that, he's gotta marry someone. So his assistant marries him, and they're like navigating each other and like how to go from like workers to like marriage, and like it's just like an arranged marriage, but then they end up falling in love with each other, which was really sweet. And it's a Grumpy Sunshine book. The 60th book that I read in 2024 is Crash the Chatterbox by Stephen Furtick. And I read this book every single day while I did like my prayer. I never know how to explain it. Like when I would pray and like read the Bible and all that, I kind of have like I wouldn't say a routine, but I have like things that I do, and reading this book was one of them. I read like 5 minutes of it every single day, and I rated this book an 8.5 out of 10. This book really talks about how a lot of the things that we believe about ourselves is because we've let what society and what other people tell us get into our heads so much that we start to believe it. So we have all these negative thoughts about ourselves and like how our lives are going to be, and like how we look, what we do, X, Y, and Z. And he really explains how to like stop those thoughts, because those thoughts don't come from God, because God sees you as his precious child and he loves you. And God, he sees your faults, but he sees you with eyes of love. And like, if the creator of the world sees you with those eyes of love, why aren't you seeing yourself with those eyes of love too? It was a very good book. I definitely recommend it. The next book I read is Sometimes I Lie, and my friend Anna Lee recommended this book to me. This is one of my favorite books that I read in 2024. I rated this book a 10 out of 10. I'm like trying to figure out what I could say so I don't spoil it. So she's in a coma, and she's trying to figure out how she got in this coma. Like there was a huge accident, and she's trying to like put the pieces together, but throughout all these things she keeps saying like, I'm a liar, like I lie a lot. And then these letters come into place, and like there's people that come in and out of visiting her There was just so many plot twists. The end reveals like the whole, like everything that happened, who was actually telling the story, which is wild. And then it ends in an even bigger mindfuck. And I'm like, there needs to be a second book, but I don't think there is. The next book I read is The Defining Decade, and Nina gave me this book for my birthday. I've been wanting to read it for so long, and I rated this book a 7.5 out of 10. The reason that I rated this book a 7.5 out of 10 is because I feel like most of the things that I read in here are things that I already knew from my parents, and it just really opened my eyes on how blessed I am to have the parents that I do. There have been some books that's all about like self-help, and like not only that, but like a lot of things about like your faith and like God, that I'm like, why am I reading this? Like, I already know this, because it's just foundation stuff my parents have put in me since I was very, very little. And I feel like I'm very blessed to have parents like that. And that was one of those books. This book, it's really what it says. It's about how to make your 20s count, and how like your 30s are really like your new 20s, I guess you could say. Because in your 20s, it's okay for you to fail, and like you're still figuring out who you are as a person. I'm 23, and I think that I'm very young, but I also think that I'm like very old, and there's a lot of times where I've had just breakdowns to my mom, where she's like, I've been crying in the car, and she's like, I need you to pull over and like stop driving, because like you need to sort yourself out. Because I just feel like I compare myself to other people's lives and like the accomplishments that they've had, or like the things that they're doing. And it just talks about how everyone in this world is in a different path, and your path is not gonna look like someone else's. And to just really like get out of the mindset that like you should be somewhere, and that if you want to like accomplish these goals, like a goal is nothing without a plan, it's a dream. So it's very, very good, and it's also very eye-opening on very like relationships, and not only romantically, but friendships, and the type of people that like you should be getting involved with. It talks a lot about how hookup culture and situationship culture that we live in has really brought ourselves back, because there are a lot of people that will use being exclusive as a way to like get you to like be with them, but they can go and do whatever they want, but you weren't technically dating, so like they didn't do anything wrong kind of situation. And how a lot of people like hold back, and they're with this situationship for years without that commitment, and that holds them back from becoming the person that they're supposed to be and meeting people that they're supposed to. The next book I read is The Nantucket Hotel. I have heard great things about this author, and I unfortunately did not like this book. I rated this book a 5 out of 10. One of the things that I hated about this book is that it was written in third person. And if you know me, I hate books in third person. This gazillionaire in Europe, I believe, buys this hotel in Nantucket, and he hires people, and then there's this like woman who has a secret identity who goes around rating hotels in number of keys. The whole thing that he wants is for this person to come and have the best experience and give them the 5 keys. Well, the hotel is haunted by this mistress who was set on fire in 1922. And she is trying to get people, like she's the ghost, is trying to get people to know that she's there. It's not a scary book. And secrets come out, a lot of things come out, and a little bit of a rom-com-y book, but for me personally, it was a little mid. The next book I read is A Night to Remember, and my friend Nick recommended this book to me, and I rated this book a 10 out of 10. Titanic has been my favorite movie since I was 12 years old. I watch this movie at least once a year, and this book is all about the history of the Titanic and the passengers on board and the night that the ship sank, and it gives a lot of history and facts, which made me cry a lot. This part kind of confused me because I've read that there was no official passenger list. I've read that on a couple sites, but I've also read that there is a passenger list. In the back, that's all the names of the passenger lists, and he italicizes the people that survived and then the people that didn't. One of the facts that really got to me was that there were more first-class men saved than there was third-class children. Another part that I remember sobbing my eyes out was they had interviewed a Titanic survivor, and he said that there was a moment where he was in the water and he sees a man holding a baby. As the ship was going down while they're in the water, a huge wave comes, and the baby and the man go underwater. So does the survivor. They come back up. He sees the man. The baby is never to be seen again. It was very, very good, very heartbreaking, very eye-opening. Definitely recommend it. The next and final book of 2024, also my 65th book of the year, was Rebecca Yarros's latest release called Variation. Rebecca Yarros, she's my favorite author. There's not a thing I wouldn't do for this woman. I love her. I love her with every ounce of me. But this book was a disappointment. I rated it a 6.5 out of 10. This book takes place in the Cape in Massachusetts. And there's this ballerina who has a summer house there and goes there every summer to train. 10 years ago, she met this guy because her sister was drowning and he was in the water and he saved her. And then they started like dating, like hush hush. And he is now a rescue swimmer. And one of her sisters dies. I think she's like one of 3 or one of 4 kids. And surprise, surprise, her sister had given up a baby for adoption. And his sister, without knowing, adopted her. So the little girl is 10 years old and she's trying to find her birth parents, and she thinks that the ballerina is her mom. She's not, she's her aunt, and she wants to be a ballet dancer, but her adoptive mom does not let her. They are rekindling their romance. They're going through ups and downs and betrayals, and you know, she's like injured, so she like can't really be a professional ballerina anymore, but she's trying to. She's upset that he's a rescue swimmer. It's a whole thing. It's a lot of ups and downs. It was very repetitive. Happy ending at the end, obviously, but just not her best. So that concludes all the 65 books that I read in 2024. I hope you guys enjoyed this little series. I hope you enjoyed this video. 2025 will be coming at you soon, hopefully. And yeah, like I said, if you want to watch all the other books that I have read in 2024, maybe get some suggestions, maybe you disagree with me, agree with me, whatever you want to do, they're all linked down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and see you next time.